Everdark, Episode 98, Weapon of Choice. Last on Everdark, feeling anxious about his parents and unable to sit still, Julian suggests that Damon meet more humans so that he might understand his supposed future subjects. As they dress to attend a fancy evening at a museum gala, Julian tells Damon of one of his adventures with Christian that involved what ended up being a creature from the Everdark that somehow made its way to Earth.
You are not going to the Well of All Souls with Kmon,
Fiona hissed in Christian's ear. She'd taken him as far away from Kmon as the suffocatingly small dungeon allowed. Kmon had helped them with this by going to the back of his cell. Christian was sure, though, that Kmon knew what they were discussing. Not that Kmon showed it. The former preceptor leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, legs crossed at the ankles. Kmon's expression was mild and completely unconcerned. Despite being imprisoned, he looked as cool and clean as if he were lounging in an upscale hotel.
That's exactly what I must do. The longer the Harrows are in Callie's possession, the greater the chance he'll harm them.
Christian pointed out.
We've seen a little of what Damon can do, but Callie has seen all of it. I have a feeling that there's going to come a time when he realizes that there are no good options left for him. So to avenge himself upon Damon, he could destroy the gems and simply disappear.
Fiona's expression darkened as she took in his words. He knew the moment she agreed with him even without reading her thoughts. Her expression cleared, and a worried frown appeared on her lips.
All right, I see your point.
She sighed.
Well, we're not doing this without Balthazar.
He stared hard at her. She blinked.
What?
I can't concentrate when he's here.
Christian stated as his hand snuck into his pants and touched the gem.
I don't want...
Don't want what?
Fiona's eyebrows rose. Christian's lips flattened as he felt a pulse from the gem. It was David, loving him. It made him sick. It made all of these gifts he had regarding the dead seem dirty and wrong. He didn't want Balthazar to be a part of that.
I don't want Balthazar to be associated with this,
he finally said. Her eyebrows lifted more.
But Balthazar is Iros and your gift is from him.
I know, but...
Christian swallowed. She didn't know about David. She couldn't therefore understand why David and being speaker to the dead were connected, and why he wanted to separate his happiness with Balthazar from it.
Balthazar will want to secure everything. He'll want to prepare. I don't think you can do either thing at the Well of All Souls.
You think he won't let you do it?
He will, but only after he's baby-proofed it,
Christian explained. And that was and wasn't true. Balthazar did allow him freedom, but he'd seen a lot more than Christian and knew of dangers that Christian hadn't even heard of.
My gut tells me that I need to do this without him. My mind needs to be focused on the Harrows.
Christian, this would involve taking Kmon out of that cage, and the three of us being alone with him in the wilds of the Everdark. If that doesn't sound like a terrible idea, I don't know what does.
Fiona told him.
Fiona speaks the truth. If I had some nefarious plan to escape from here.
Kmon called over, showing he had heard every single thing that they had said and easily overheard them.
You don't have a nefarious plan to escape?
Now Fiona's eyebrows were in her hairline. Kmon let out a huff and spread his arms.
Where would I go? Where would be safe from Damon?
Well...
Fiona opened and shut her mouth.
I guess I do see your point.
I intend to show Damon I can be an asset, which helping Christian learn his powers would certainly do. So not only do I have no desire to escape, I have no reason to,
Kmon said.
You are assuming that Damon will ever see you as an ally.
Fiona laughed.
The only difference between you and me, Fiona, is that you were a little quicker to put your lot in with Damon than I was.
Kmon pointed out. His mouth flickered into an ugly smile.
And you are, of course, Wyvern.
She jerked back as if struck. Christian realized that, unlike Arceus, who had never believed the Immortals evil, Fiona likely had. She was a confessor for the Order. She had been high on the list of people Kmon counted on to get his plans completed. Balthazar still had a problem being Iros, because of the things he'd heard about the Immortals through the vampire religion, but he hadn't believed like Fiona had likely believed.
You're Callie's fledgling, the one he chose above all else to keep his plans in motion.
Fiona scoffed.
I wasn't lucky in who my master was, but Damon cannot blame me for that. Nor can he blame me for doing what my master wanted all those years.
Kmon's body language became stiff.
You have no idea what it has been like having the immortal Callie as my master. Damon will understand how the good of what I can do outweighs the bad of what I have done now that I am free of my master.
You rose to the rank of preceptor.
Fiona cried, her hands fisting at her sides.
You weren't some victim, Kmon. You had power, prestige, influence beyond the dreams of most vampires.
I was chosen and groomed for the position.
Kmon stepped up to the cage's bars. He was rigid and shaking slightly.
What you might have seen from the outside was not the whole of it by a long shot. You rose only so far because you had no desire to connect with others. Now you are the immortal Wyvern. So what does that say about you?
What do you mean?
Her eyes had gone wide.
Why have you managed to go through your whole second life without friends, without allies even, Fiona? What is holding you back?
Kmon's eyes narrowed at her with suspicion. Christian was tempted to tell them to shelve this discussion, that it wasn't anything to do with the matter at hand. But he didn't, because he knew it was important. Kmon challenged Fiona in a way that Balthazar couldn't quite do because she saw him as a rival for Arceus's affection.
I have friends. Arceus
Is kind to everyone. He's like the patron saint of odd vampires.
Kmon barked.
His befriending you doesn't make you special, Fiona. He's kind to all broken beings.
He loves Balthazar.
Which proves my point.
Kmon hissed.
Balthazar has never fit in.
Until now. He's Damon's best friend. I bet that irritates you to no end.
Fiona's arms crossed over her chest tightly.
On the contrary, it makes quite a bit of sense to me. Balthazar has always been the comic relief. Damon needs him as a person to get drunk with, to have amusing conversations, but he will need others who can help him in more serious matters.
Kmon lifted his chin.
And that will be you, will it?
Fiona shook her head. Her beads clacked together.
Callie has proven himself untrustworthy. I am the natural successor to that slot.
Kmon retorted.
You think too much of yourself.
Fiona snapped.
On the contrary, I am very clear-eyed about myself. I always have been. And about others, too.
Kmon narrowed his silver eyes at her.
What do you offer, really, Fiona? You are cut off from your own bloodline. You have no interest in humans who he intends to rule no matter what he says. I suppose you can teleport people for him. So that makes you what? A taxi service?
Christian winced at that. Fiona was guarded. It was hard to know who she was, but Christian understood why someone would be that way. It was how he was with new people. It was clear to him that Fiona was protecting herself. Maybe it was because of something that had happened to her in this life, or when she had been Wyvern. Maybe it was simply her nature. But Christian also sensed that she could be a very loyal friend once one won her over. And she had only helped them since she realized the portrait the Order had been painting of Damon was wrong.
Not to mention, she was one of the few who questioned the Order, even though she was devout. She makes up her own mind about things and doesn't follow a crowd. That's admirable.
Fiona growled at Kmon.
You turned to me often enough, Kmon. Maybe I'm just someone who gets things done.
Maybe you are.
Kmon shrugged, appearing to not care about her or this conversation any longer.
All I was saying was that if Damon can find a use for someone like you, then I'm sure he can for me. Neither of us has much to recommend us personality-wise.
You're quite right. Neither of us are amusing. But you can't be trusted, Kmon.
Fiona said simply.
Not fully. Because in the end, you'll always do what is best for you.
And Damon is that.
Kmon answered with another shrug.
I will give my all to him because of it.
But only for so long as it serves you.
She added.
Do you think there will ever be a time when it does not?
Kmon laughed dryly. He jerked his head up above.
I've been hearing all of those fools up above bemoaning their fate.
He smoothed a hand down the front of his still immaculate outfit.
I'm still a vampire. They are food. And Damon made that distinction with little more than a snap of his fingers. So I don't think there will ever come a time when being on his team is a bad idea.
Callie seems to think so.
Fiona pointed out.
On the contrary, Callie is hurt because Damon left him.
Christian said quietly.
What we're seeing is him throwing a fit at Damon. He didn't demonize Damon in the Order. He continued to hold him up as the ideal. He might have even intended to give this new peaceful vampire existence to Damon when he woke. But then things went wrong. Perhaps.
Christian shook his head.
I'm not very good at understanding people's motivations, especially if they're emotion-based.
I think you see yourself way too short.
Fiona said kindly.
Logically or emotionally, how the Order venerates Damon says something about how Callie feels.
Indeed, seeing him as wounded by Damon's seeming abandonment, that sounds correct, Christian.
Kmon nodded, his tone almost warm as if Christian were his student and he had performed admirably.
And his villainizing of all the other immortals, well, it would set himself up as the favoured one when Damon returned.
Yet he imprisoned Seer and had you kill the Harrows.
Christian said.
He panicked, possibly.
Fiona mused.
He knew he would catch hell for Seer. Maybe he thought he could get things further in order before Damon came back. Or he feared what people would do if they learned where Night Valen was, that they might disturb his rest.
Christian shook his head.
Whatever his motivations then and now, we can't let him keep the Harrows, especially not if you can restore them, Kmon.
Christian's gaze fixed on the Callie vampire. Kmorn's mind was closed to him. Christian supposed he was too new at this to get past the defenses of such a formidable vampire. Or perhaps his gifts were more along the lines of just hearing the dead and not the living. He felt David's morbid longing for him then very keenly and slipped his hand out of his pocket. Kmon caught the movement and understood what it was.
It's like having your worst enemy constantly near you, isn't it?
Kmon asked. Christian froze but then relaxed. Kmon knew too much already. What harm was there in him knowing more?
He won't go away. I tried to send him away, but he simply went back into the gem.
Christian shrugged.
He won't leave me alone.
Oh, he could be made to. Part of you must be holding on to him.
Kmon said.
I'm not.
Christian's voice rose up. He pressed his lips together.
I want him gone. I assure you of that.
So he gets to enjoy whatever comes next? After he did whatever he did to you?
Kmon asked.
I just want to be free of him.
Christian's voice sounded small.
I'm with Balthazar now, and I know the difference between what David did and what should be.
Fiona touched his shoulder.
We hold on to bad things, Christian, so we don't forget what the world can do to us. Like a scar that you can rub and remember what is possible.
Kmon's hands were on the bars.
I can send him away, Christian. Or torture him. Or do whatever you wish me to do with him.
I don't want you to harm him,
Christian said with a shake of his head.
He's sick, and I need to be the one that deals with him.
We post updates on our YouTube community tab quite often. You can also join our mailing list, since we send out news a few times a week. I'll post the link to both the community tab and the mailing list form in the notes, so you can be up to date on what's coming.
Kmon nodded, as if this were good.
It's better for certain that you do, because there is the other side to those scars. You can know just what you're capable of if anyone thinks to mess with you.
That was true. Christian liked the idea of being able to protect himself and the ones he loved. That just firmed his resolve to find Julian's parents.
How long would it take to get to the Well of All Souls?
Christian asked.
If Fiona can take us to the Bridge of Passing, I can lead us from there.
Kmon said. Christian frowned.
Why can't Fiona just teleport us?
I've never been there.
She answered, and then added with a furrowed brow.
And I'm guessing it's a place of extreme power which always affects my powers negatively.
How long then from this bridge to the well?
Christian asked.
It would take a few hours.
Kmon said.
A few hours?
Fiona shook her head.
Balthazar will go insane if you're gone that long.
I'll tell him where I'm going and that I'm safe when we're on our way.
Christian answered. Again, that feeling of not wanting Balthazar touched by this aspect of him coming through strongly.
Your instincts to keep him from knowing just how close your powers are to Akali's is the right one, Christian.
Kmon said with a slow nod.
For as much as an Iros vampire might be loathed, that is nothing compared to Akali.
Christian, Balthazar adores every part of you. He wouldn't judge you badly for anything.
Fiona said with a surprising amount of vehemence.
Balthazar has never been one to be that open-minded, Fiona.
Kmon scoffed.
He is about his fledgling, Kmon.
She pointed out.
You don't have to come, Fiona. I understand if you don't want to be a part of this,
Christian said, though that meant she would just go teleport to Balthazar, tell him everything, and then teleport a hissing, spitting Balthazar to their location. She put a hand on her temple and sighed.
I think this is the wrong plan, Christian. I think you should trust Balthazar not to reject you for any of your powers.
But?
Christian leaned forward.
But I am also a believer in doing things on one's own.
She shook her head as if she couldn't quite believe what she was saying.
This better work because Balthazar is going to have both our heads.
Christian smiled at her.
It will. I feel it will.
He then went over to Kmon's cage. His eyes met Kmon's.
You better have been speaking the truth about not escaping or harming either me or Fiona, because there won't be anywhere you're safe from Balthazar or Damon.
I am well aware,
Kmon said with a tip of his head. Christian unlocked the cage, and Kmon stepped out. He stretched his arms over his head and twisted his head to each side. There were soft pops, and he let out a contented sigh.
I need to eat before we go, and we should all get weapons. I would have suggested horses, but they don't react well that far out in the Everdark,
Kmon said, after lowering his arms to his sides.
All right, where are the weapons?
Christian asked.
Just a few floors up. Many are heavily spelled, but there are some that are safe to use.
Kmon explained and started walking towards the stairs. For a moment, Christian thought of ordering him to walk between him and Fiona like a prisoner, but that seemed foolish. They didn't know where they were going. Kmon did, and if Kmon decided to attack them or run, whether he was in front or between them, it would likely make little difference. So Christian gestured for Fiona to go next, but she told him to.
We are going to protect you, Christian,
she said simply. He nodded after a time. He was the weakest, being the youngest and least experienced, so he went up after Kmon, who was already at the top of the steps. The former preceptor might be acting cool, calm, and collected about getting out of the cage, but it was clear he wanted to spend no more time here. Christian hurried after him. They took the elevator to the 5th floor of the spire. Christian studied the mechanism but couldn't figure out how the car was moving, as there was nothing that was lifting or propelling the car upwards. Kmon, who was standing with his back to the glass, arms folded again, smiled at Christian's questions and investigation.
It is magic. We haven't been able to reproduce it,
Kmon explained.
Did Damon and the other immortals build these cities?
Christian asked as they all stepped out of the car onto the 5th floor.
Some say they did. Others claim it was another race altogether who simply vanished or who the immortals drained away,
Kmon answered. When Christian glanced at Fiona to see if she knew anything more, she shook her head and said,
Despite me supposedly being Wyvern, I have no more information than Kmon. I have no memories at all of my former self.
Supposedly.
Kmon snorted as he strode ahead of them along the hallway towards a set of double doors.
I'm not like Balthazar. I don't remember my past. I have no fledglings coming up to me calling me Wyvern.
She bristled.
I am just very good at my gift, that's all. I think they've made a mistake.
You think Damon's made a mistake?
Christian asked.
He doesn't seem to have much faith in me.
Fiona immediately bit her lip as if she'd said too much. Kmon's thin laugh confirmed she had said too much in front of him.
Maybe he wasn't fond of Wyvern back in the day.
Perhaps not. I do not need to be liked to be respected.
She was rigid again.
You are liked, Fiona. And contrary to what Kmon said, the fact that Arceus clearly loves you very much says good things about you.
Christian told her. She smiled at him, and the tension dropped from her. Kmon stopped outside of a set of double doors. There weren't any door handles that Christian could see, but there was an indent that held some kind of design. Kmon twisted off a ring he was wearing and stuck it into this slot. There was a cranking sound, and the doors popped open. Christian leaned around Kmon's tall figure to look inside. Cold, white lights flickered on from thick crystals that studded the arched ceiling above their heads. The room was long and narrow. On the sides were rows upon rows of shelves, with weapons of all sorts placed upon them. At the far end, Christian could see dummies that were wearing armor and robes that wouldn't have been out of place in an RPG.
Damon and Balthazar have borage, so I must pick another weapon,
Kmon muttered as he stepped inside and pulled one of the shelves out. It appeared that the shelves were sitting on tracks that allowed them to extend from the wall, so it was easier to see and take what was lying upon the blue velvet that covered them. Kmon's hands hovered over to a double-handed longsword. The metal gleamed like ice under a full moon. The hilt had alternating black and silver wire. There was a white stone at the base of the hilt and a few marks etched on the blade. Kmon grunted and picked it up. He hefted the weapon and thrust it out in front of him, lowering his head so that his eyes were even with the blade.
Dawnbreaker,
Fiona whispered. Christian looked over his shoulder. Her expression was strange, with awe and fear in equal measure.
that's the name of the weapon. I did not know that anyone could touch it. Last I heard, Tolian did and was dusted.
Yes, Tolian wasn't worthy,
Kmon said and strapped the sword's scabbard to his back.
Is this the first time you picked Dawnbreaker up?
Christian asked. Kmon smiled at him.
Yes.
Fiona let out a gasp, which confirmed Christian's own feeling about this.
You risked getting turned to dust right now? I assume that's what dusted means.
Christian's brows drew together.
I suppose some would call it a risk, but I know my worth.
Kmon answered with a shrug. Against his better judgment, Christian felt a stirring of respect for Kmon. He even thought that Balthazar might be grudgingly impressed.
What weapons are safe?
Fiona asked as her gaze drifted all over the shelves. Kmon stepped down the line of shelves and pulled out two shelves on opposite sides of one another. There was a pair of curved daggers, made of that same icy metal as Dawnbreaker, with red stones set into their hilts with a faint tracery of words all along their lengths. Christian immediately felt drawn to them. He thought he heard them talking to him. "Pick me," Christian imagined them saying and laughed internally. That was ridiculous. Besides, the sounds were not distinct. Yet when his hands hovered over the hilts, he knew he was hearing something, a whispering that grew louder as he grew nearer to touching them. When he picked up the daggers, there was the sound of a thunderclap and then silence. He thought he had gone deaf for a moment, but then the normal sounds popped back in. He hefted the daggers in his hands. They felt light, almost too light, as if they were empty and needed filling. There was a belt with two scabbards. It felt sort of silly to put weapons on with his normal clothes, but he did it anyway. The daggers easily fitted into their scabbards, and it felt surprisingly right to have them on.
The daggers are called Hope's End,
Kmon said. Christian let out a soft chuckle.
Well, that's evocative.
Indeed.
Christian turned around to see what weapon that Fiona had chosen. It was a longbow, made of a beautiful, shining black wood with a sheaf of glass-tipped arrows. She had knocked one and was looking down the arrow at the far wall, or maybe she was aiming at Kmon. She brought the arrow down and expertly slid it back home with the 24 other arrows. Her hands moved up and down the silky wood of the bow and tested the strength of the string.
Who were the vampires that established these were safe?
Fiona asked as she kept stroking the bow.
If it had been me, I never would have put these back.
When Kmon didn't answer, Christian looked at him sharply.
Did anyone establish these were safe?
Christian asked, already guessing the answer.
No, no one had.
Fiona whispered.
By the order, Kmon, you put Christian's life at risk.
She had an arrow nocked and ready to go. It was aiming at Kmon's heart. He did not react in any way.
There's no way to know if a weapon is truly safe for everyone, Fiona,
Kmon said simply.
but these were safe bets for both of you to the extent that anything is safe.
How so?
Christian's hands fingered the dagger's hilt. He was angry with Kmon. but somehow he couldn't regret touching the daggers. They were his in some way, and he might have been too cautious to pick them up if he'd known the danger involved.
The daggers you so naturally wear have soul gems in the hilts, meaning that they can hold the souls of your enemies.
Kmon explained.
That makes them Kali weapons, not Iros ones.
Fiona hissed, and her arrow was very steady.
Yes, but they have Iros symbols on the blades.
Kmon answered.
So I always believed that they must be made for a speaker. I was right.
Christian rested his palms against the stones that remained cold despite the warmth of his skin.
And the bow and arrows?
Fiona lifted an eyebrow at him even as she continued to have such steady aim. Kmon cracked a smile and let out a bark of laughter.
Oh, come now, Fiona. Surely you recognize Wyvern's bow, Faithkeeper, from the scriptures.
Fiona's expression went completely blank. Her silver eyes showed she wasn't seeing what was ahead of her, but something inside.
Fiona, are you all right?
Christian asked. She shook her head as if to clear it.
Yes, Christian, I'm fine. But we both could have been far from all right by touching these weapons.
Her eyes were on Christian again.
You cannot take such risks with our lives, Kmon. Do what you wish with yours, but ours are not yours to risk.
Kmon's silver eyes glowed hotly in that moment.
Everything is risk, Fiona. Nothing and nowhere are truly safe in the Everdark. You should know that.
He turned to Christian.
I know your worth. I had no doubts that the daggers would respond to you. But
He leaned forward.
there is risk and danger in all of this, Christian. You are a speaker to the dead. Your second life will never be easy because of it. You'll never truly be safe anywhere. But I promise to help you master your gift if you've the courage to follow my lead.
You're asking me to trust you?
Christian asked more than stated.
There has to be trust between a teacher and a student.
Kmon nodded.
Even though this path is not without danger.
Christian qualified.
Especially because it isn't.
Kmon nodded again.
Christian, we can always turn back now. We can go get Balthazar.
Fiona said. Christian's hands closed over the hilts of the daggers. Balthazar would never have allowed Christian to touch these daggers, and he would have been right not to. But then Christian would never have felt the rightness of them, the fact that they belonged to him.
Let's continue.
Christian said.
Kmon, let's get you fed, and then we go to the Well of All Souls.
Join us next time for episode 99, Ruthless.
Have you wanted to support us but have no money? There is a very important way you can help us out. If you know one person who would truly enjoy this story, send them to the first episode. Since gay romantic audio stories are not exactly mainstream content, it's hard for people to find us in a world where Mr. Beast challenges and true crime podcasts reign over us all. But by recommending us, you can help the story get discovered and help someone in your life find what might be their next fiction addiction. I'll post a link to episode 1 in the notes.